start. I'm Billy Connelly. I'm speaking to you as chairperson of Caherlistrane, Kilcoona Community Council, and we're the organisers of this event this evening in conjunction with Mary J. We started talking about this event about 2 years ago. We had a very successful gathering about 5 years ago. We talked about doing something in 3 or 4 years again, and then back around 2016 we discussed the possibility of doing an event like this. We had numerous discussions about it, and eventually we came up with this idea probably 7 or 8 weeks ago, I suppose. In the background, Mary has been working away with our special guest this evening and with the media and lots of other things. So for me personally, and particularly as chairman of the Community Council, this is probably one of the special moments really in my time as a Caherlistrane person, and particularly as chairman of the Community Council. We're absolutely blessed, first of all, this evening with the weather, just amazing. We're here today at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and the heavens opened, and we were preparing to go inside. And then by 6 o'clock, the sun started to shine, and the place dried up. So that's all I'm going to say to you. I'm delighted that you all could make the effort to come. This is obviously a very significant evening for a lot of people here who were involved in the event 50 years ago. I was only 15 years of age myself. I remember it as a young lad, but I wasn't involved. But it was a big event at the time, and I leave it to people who know more about it, who were actually directly involved. I'd leave it to them to talk more in detail. So our first guest this evening was supposed to be Hugh Oram. Now unfortunately Hugh is unwell and is heartbroken that he can't be here with us. But we have the next best thing, his friend, writer and biographer Maria Gillen, who will read his CCF segment here for us. Marie, Hugh and Mary linked up over their joint interest in Achill Island and its history some years ago. Where Maria's mother comes from, Van Hugh has been one of Ireland's most distinguished writers and journalists for over half a century. The author of 86 books, his latest, Leeson Street. He just published he currently writes the Irishman's Diary in the Irish Times, has worked for RTE Radio, Sunday Miscellany and Seascape since 1982. His big break came in the mid-70s with the Aer Lingus Carrey magazine. France is a place that is very close to his heart. Hugh has written for Fedor and Michel travel guides. He is widely known in advertising circles as the author of 800-page history of advertising. So, to represent him this evening, please welcome and give a big Caherlistrane welcome to Maria Gillen.
Thank you very much. In the words of Hugh Oram, many overseas films have been made in Ireland over the past 70 years, but no production was so over the top as was Alfred the Great. A film largely shot on location in County Galway in 1968, 50 years ago, which involved replica Viking ships sailing on the River Shannon as waterborne battle scenes from the 9th century were reenacted. Alfred the Great was meant to depict all the epic battles of that era, well over 1,000 years ago, and County Galway was meant to stand in for Wessex in England. No expense was spared in making the film, with the best production people in the business brought in and a star-studded cast. David Hemmings was Alfred the Great. It was said that in his role as a Viking king, Michael York gave his best performance ever. 2 young actors got their first movie roles in the film, Ian McKellen and Sinead Cusack. Since both have gone on to stardom in the acting profession, and Ian McKellen managed to get a knighthood in 1990. Both of them have been very involved in the recollections of 50 years ago. Many other Irish actors took part in the film, such as Jim Norton. The company that made the film was MGM in Galway. It was dubbed Money Gone Mad, as they splashed out on huge sums of money on getting everything right for the film. One of the people with the Galway connections who was very much involved with the MGM was the late Lord Killannon of Olympic fame, who was a co-producer. Huge studios were built near Gort in County Galway for filming the indoor scenes, and many local companies made Viking replicas of everything from furniture to battle shields. MGM had gone to great lengths, first of all, to make sure the script was 100% accurate, down to the very last detail of Viking times. 450 soldiers from Western and Southern Command in the army were recruited to take part in the film, and all underwent meticulous training. Vast numbers of extras were also taken on, about 1,500 in all. So many that students from NUI Galway didn't have to go to England that summer to seek work during the long summer break. They all got extra work on the film, with pay ranging from £4 to 14 a day, which was extremely good money in those days. Sometimes the extras went into battle scenes still wearing glasses and wristwatches. One of the young men taken on as an extra with the Galway University connections was called Michael D. Higgins. I wonder whatever became of him. Such was the scale of the enterprise that 60 horses were put on payroll and 12 very realistic rubber dummies were made that looked uncannily like dead bodies. One of the settings for the battle scene was Knockma Hill, a wonderful feature of North County Galway, just a short distance from Castlehacket House. The hill is only 552 feet high, but if you do the wonderful climb to the top on a clear day, you'll get fantastic views over 6 counties in the western part of Ireland. MGM chose the hill for one of the battle scenes and promptly got a 200-foot-long figure of a white horse carved onto the hillside. Up to 500 members of the Irish Army took part in the battle scenes in Knockma Hill, and many other sequences were filmed elsewhere in County Galway and in County Westmeath. When it came to making replicas for the film, the most effort and expense went into building 2 wooden Viking longships. MGM entrusted this work to a shipyard in Denmark, descendants of the ancient Vikings. The work in building these 2 longships was painstakingly and very accurate. The 2 Viking ships with their great sails and galleys of oarsmen were as close to the original seen in the west of Ireland over 1,000 years ago as it was possible to get. Once again, members of the Irish Army found a new role as latter-day Viking sailors, complete with spectacular helmets. Some of the army men had special training to sail the longships. Some waterborne scenes from the film were shot in Rosslake, County Galway, while most of the longship cruising was done on the River Shannon, not too far from Athlone. The 2 Viking longships were so authentic that it was easy to imagine how original Vikings had terrorized the local people in Ireland when they came ashore from their boats. Rather sadly, the 2 longships in the film didn't survive for long. One of them was burned deliberately in a firestorm sequence of the film, while the other found moorings for a while in Athlone but didn't last there either. There was just one thing the filmmakers couldn't fix: the weather. MGM wanted grey, overcast skies to mirror what they thought were the best weather conditions in original times. Instead, 1968 was one of the best summers for years. Nice and warm with blue skies. Everyone had great fun in the making of the film, and many people in North Galway, such as Mary J. Murphy, a noted writer and author who lives right here in Carreystrane, have dined out on these stories right up to the present. Mary wrote an excellent book on the subject, Viking Summer, which tells the story of an ambitious film shoot, complete with Viking longships that went horribly wrong. MGM poured huge resources into the making of the film to make it as authentic as possible. After all the filming had been done and the editing completed, the film was ready to be launched in an unsuspecting world. After the launch, the world remained unsuspecting. It got dreadful reviews, and if Rotten Tomatoes, the online film review service, had been around in those days, it would have had a field day. Alfred the Great absolutely bombed at the box office. If ever a film died a death, this was it. Building those replica Viking longships had been to no avail. To make matters even worse, many local people in County Galway who had taken part in the film couldn't even recognise themselves on screen. But the disaster at the box office all those years ago is making for fond remembrance this summer. A party to end all parties has taken place right here tonight. And many of the illustrious people here tonight is son of Lord Culannan's, Redmond Morris, who made his movie debut in the film, who is regaling with everyone with the movie's history. Many fun times will be recalled. It's just a pity that one of those Viking longships didn't survive to do a few more trips up and down the Cheh. Thank you very much.
Okay, just before we move on to our next guest, this was something that I was supposed to do at the very beginning. And what I want to do is, I want to introduce everybody here this evening who haven't met these two people already. That's the owners of this Castlehacket House. I want to introduce you to Dennis and to Joyce McDonagh. If they might just come up for a second and just talk to you. Yeah, as I said at the beginning, you know, it's unbelievable for us here in Caherlistrane now to have access for an event like this here. It's the second time we've done it in the space of about 6 weeks, and I think the potential here is unbelievable. I'm not sure if you want to say anything very briefly.
Well, just very briefly, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, this evening. Microphone's not very friendly to me. We are going to progress here, I hope, with our B&B. Joyce is going to conduct yoga classes here and is capable of doing teacher training. So if you've got some pains, Joyce is the one to see. We hope to actually have more events here. I look at opening a gallery here and getting involved with the arts, especially with 2020. And if anyone has anything they'd like to contribute as far as an idea that might be appropriate for 2020, please let us know. In the meantime, enjoy your evening. Thank you very much.
I thought I might get stage fright, so I went and wrote this down. And it's very short and sweet, and of course, thank you all for coming. So just to say, hope your memories are as fond and as plentiful as mine here at Castlehacket House.
Yes. Okay. Now, next, I want to introduce a man who talks to a crowd here this evening. Jim Carney needs little or no introduction, as he is a native of Milltown, North Galway. In a 50-year career in print journalism and broadcasting, he has worked for the Tuam Herald, the Irish Independent, RTE. In 1979, he was the first presenter of the RTE flagship sports programme, The Sunday Game. He joins us here this evening because in the summer of 1968, he was an extra in the filming of Alfred the Great at Knockma Hill and has many tall tales to tell. He also, we are told, won the best beard competition during filming. And let's hope that he tells us that story too this evening, along with many others. Without any more ado, let me please welcome our own Jim Carney.
There were actually two beard competitions. I won the junior one. It was the Tuam Youth Club beard competition. I think the entry was about 2 or 3 people, and the other two weren't really able to grow beards like I was. But, however, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wonderful pleasure to be with you all this evening. We are all united here, I think, in a desire to enjoy this evening, but also to pay tribute to the people who made this evening possible. People like Mary J. Murphy, or Mary Glynn as we also know her, for her wonderful book, Viking Summer. I have brought my own copy of it with me, and there's an opportunity as well for you, I think, to take home this book later on tonight, and we can talk about that a little bit later on. But also Caherlistrane, Kilcoona Community Council and the heritage wing of that organisation, all the wonderful people in it. 50 years ago I was in Alfred the Great, but actually I think about 55 years ago or so I got to know a bit about Brendan Gannon and the footballers of Caherlistrane and the Shrewd Sevens and all those. So those stories will be mentioned tonight as well, I'm sure. I would like to start, ladies and gentlemen, by saying that I think there could be no better setting for this remarkable gathering, and it is truly remarkable. The atmosphere here is very, very special. I think it feels like, and I said this on my Facebook page during the week, and I got a very nice reaction to the very description that I used of it. I think we're in the Downton Abbey of North Galway here this evening. And we can go home tonight and maybe pull out our old battered copies of Brideshead Revisited as well and read through it, because this is the atmosphere I think that's conjured up here this evening. It's a magnificent house. It's to the immense credit of Denis and Joyce McDonagh that they have so graciously and so enthusiastically welcomed us all here this evening. I wish I had the skill myself to actually speak in one sentence the way Joyce did, you know, but in fairness I'm going to defend myself for the long speech and the long talk I'm going to give you here this evening by when I asked Mary how long do you want me to talk, 5, 10 or 15 minutes, she said talk for as long as you want, and then she said at least 30 minutes. So I will thank you all in advance for listening to me. But to return to Denis and Joyce, you made us so welcome here this evening, but the fact that you have come to live here, for that we welcome you, Denis and Joyce, to this beautiful part of North Galway, this beautiful part of the west of Ireland. And we wish you, Denis and Joyce, long life, health and happiness here. Across the road, across the road is Knockma, Crookma in Old Irish, the hill of the plain, which may or may not be the burial site of Queen Maeve of ancient legend, stretching back to the Iron Age. For as you all know, I'm sure, Knockna in County Sligo claims that too, and so does Rathcrohan, a place in Tulsk, County Roscommon. But we will never give up our claim on Queen Maeve and Knockma. Up our side, that's the war cry. When we were young and going to school, we learned in tales from Irish mythology that Queen Maeve ruled over all of Connacht, and that Crahur MacNessa, the King of Ulster, was both her husband, for a while anyway, and her enemy. I'm tying in a lot of strands here, so in case you're wondering why I'm bringing up odd things like that, there is coherence, I hope, in them. In the 9th century, England also had a national geography of kingdoms, and they too, there were 7 of them, a heptarchy, had a history of fighting among themselves. But 2 of them united, through marriage, Wessex and Mercia, to successfully fight the invading Vikings, and those particular branch of the Vikings were the Danes. That, of course, is the story of the 22-year-old Alfred the Great, who married Ailswith, the King of Mercia's daughter, and putting the mythology of Ireland and England together, and it's very convenient that we can do that in this case, there can be no doubt but a place like Knockma was ideal with its mythology and history, ideal for the making of much of the film we're here to discuss this evening, Alfred the Great. There's a famous quote, but no way seemingly of establishing who first said it, that if you remember the 60s, you really were not there. But I don't go along with that. I'm old enough to have been there, a child of the 1950s, who in the 60s went from being a 10-year-old to a 20-year-old. It was my favourite decade. It always will be. I had the time of my life in the 60s. Even going to secondary school in Tuam CBS, a school now closed, only 6 miles away up the Dublin Road. I remember at 15 and 16 years of age playing football for the school, throwing small stones at the windows of the Mercian Prez borders, taking part in a school play in 1966 to mark the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising. We had a centenary only 2 years ago. It's a sign that all 68-year-olds now are moving on. And then when I was 17 years of age, I went to London to work in a pub near the end of the Bakerloo line. And through all of July and August of that year, Little did I think I could match it the following year. That was 67. I discovered the magic of a new time in one of the world's greatest cities, for it was the summer of love, as it became known. Carnaby Street, the Marquee Club, being a hippie, flower power, all those things, admission was free. Just tune in and turn on, it was open to the world. You could have it all for about £20 a week. Standard of living wasn't great at the time. One of the cultural high points, and again I'm tying in strands here, one of the cultural high points, it has iconic status, of the Beatles and Rolling Stones, and that very heavily influenced Amazing Time. The era that the Beatles and Stones helped to create was the Antonioni film Blow Up, which, more than a half a century later, is still regarded as quintessentially the bringing to vibrant, exciting life what became known as swinging London. The young star of that 1966 film, making a sensational impact in cinema all over the world, was David Hemmings from Guildford in Surrey. And 2 years later, at the age of 26, he swapped swinging London for bucolic Belclare and the lovely sylvan setting of Knockma. What a sight! We should all, I think, just look behind us even for 2 seconds to see that beautiful hill up there. It's the most stunning sight. When I walked in here tonight, I was gobsmacked to look out the big window and see it. Now, in Tuam CBS, going back to that time, in the long, hot summer of 1968, and it was, a group of us preparing for the Leaving Cert, long before the points race got into its stride, heard about Alfred the Great coming to Galway. In fact, there was a story in the Tuam Herald written by Jim Fahey as far back as December 1967. You'll see the cuttings inside. I have to admit that neither then nor ever since did I really have any interest in the other locations chosen by director Clive Donner and his production people for the shooting of the film. Except, I hasten to add, all that I've read about it now in Mary J. Murphy's brilliant book, which he brought out in 2008. Someday, Kilcoona Cheh, I will visit Kilcreast and Ross Lake over near Moycullen and Uachtarar, that part of that side of Lough Corrib, and conjure up in my mind how it was in those two location bases 50 years ago. It's simply that Knockma was where it all happened for us. It was exciting. It was a thrilling prospect, really, when we turned up to meet the recruitment people at I think it was the town hall. I wasn't certain about that, but one of the lads with me, my colleague in secondary school, in Leaving Cert year, my colleague in the football team as well, Pádraig Dibley, who's with me here tonight, and he says, yes, we went to the town hall to meet them. You see, I can remember the 60s, as I said, but not all of it in great detail, and memory can play tricks on any person, as the writer L.P. Hartley's famous opening line of his great novel, The Go-Between, puts it, the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. The big question at those, actually I think the irony of that was that Hartley borrowed that line from a friend of his who had used it publicly somewhere else, but he's forever, anyway, credited with it, Shinch Gael. The big question at our short auditions, although audition is undoubtedly too grand a word for it, was, how quickly can you grow a thick beard? It helped, of course, that most of us were all said to let our hair grow long for the summer, as was the style in the 60s, and with the Leaving Cert coming closer, the Christian brothers were less inclined to insist on short haircuts as they were earlier in the school year. We were also asked, incidentally, if we could ride a horse, and luckily, we knew the secret of giving the right answers to all tricky questions. Lie convincingly. I mean, we were preparing for battle here. The Saxons, including us, and the UCG students, I will use UCG because it was UCG at the time, it's NUIG now, versus the Danes, who were mostly army men from Dooney Wheelisa in Renmore. And if we had to tell a small lie, to quote an English politician from long ago, the first Viscount Snowden, the truth is the first casualty of war, and we were at war. Or as John Wayne used to say in his cowboy movies, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. The beginning of our final school year, which would have been September 1967, marked the introduction to this country of free education and free transport to school. It was introduced by the then Minister for Education, Donogh O'Malley, who very sadly was killed in a car crash in 1968. Now, interestingly, for the filming of Alfred the Great on Knockma, the film company did a deal with either the Department of Education or CIE, or both more likely, and when we turned up at the square in Tuam, it actually was school buses that transported us out to Knockma. And again, my memory was slightly dodgy on that, but again, I talked to Pádraig Dibley, and I talked to a great friend of mine on the film, and in school as well, Eddie Kelly, and they were sure of that as well. Bork's buses, of course, from just in the road, were operating privately. And I think they got very good business for the film company too, and I'm glad to hear that. As far as I remember, it was just Tony Bork and his wife Eileen. I think she was Eileen Mitchell in the 60s. They used to bring us to the football matches, actually, down in Mayo and Roscommon. Because their sons, who we now know associated so strongly with the bus company, their sons were in secondary school at the time. Pat certainly over in St. Giles is my age. When we turned up as scheduled, the entrance provided by the film company for the duration of the shooting was a little down on the Caherlistrane side of the entrance that's there now, which I'm sure many of you know. That leads on to Balladócha, to Ballochbawn, and around by Knocknacarrigan. Just inside the wall, by the road there, I think it might be Jerry Hode's land, there's a small locked gate there now, where the entrance was in the summer of '68. And it was really very exciting for us to see for the first time 5 or 6 or 7 rows, long rows of tents, cars, jeeps, lorries, and all the trendily dressed young production assistants, male and female, scurrying around the place. Straight away you knew that there was something special going on. Something very different from anything an 18-year-old from around North Galway would have seen before, unless they were in Cong in 1951 for the filming of The Quiet Man, and we now know that there wasn't the same hype about that film at the time. There was a lot of queuing going on in Knockma. First, to give your various size requirements for your costume, rough garments for us rough Saxons, more used to working the land in the Wessex of the year 878 than duty as soldiers. Footwear. For footwear, one of our lads described it as Wellingtons cut off at the ankles. It was a good description. You queued for your food, but you didn't mind. You'll find tributes to the food on many pages of Mary's book from the people she interviewed. It's really astonishing, and it's not an exaggeration, to discover that most of the people employed as extras on this multi-million-pound or multi-million-dollar MGM epic to be shown all over the world actually thought the food they got was better than the film itself. It was of its time, I have to say that, when I say this. Beef burgers, would you believe it? Beef burgers were the big discovery on Knockma that summer. They were a luxury delight. Literally the first time that many extras had seen them or eaten them. I was slightly different in that I'd been in London in '67, I discovered them in London. But they swept to the top of the menu in Knockma by popular demand. And there was a very tempting variety of desserts on the menu too. For most people, they had been a lifetime stuck on jelly and ice cream. Everything changed in the summer of '68, as it did in so many other things, serious and not so serious, all over the world. And we queued to be paid. The money was fantastic too. It's highlighted in Mary Glenn's book that there was a shift system of employing extras, and that's very important. It wasn't what you'd call a 2-tier system, day or night. It changed according to the needs of the director, but there was an element of the on for 2 days, off for 2 days about it, or you'd work days in one part of the week, and starting very, very early in the morning, I remember, and nights then for the second part of the working week. I remember exactly what I was paid for my time on the Hill. I got £3 a day and £4.10 a week, and that was from late June for about maybe 7-8 weeks or so. I'm not sure about that. But it was never 5 days a week or 5 nights a week work. I'd say, looking back, that I definitely earned at least £20 a week and up to £25 a week, and many extras made a lot more. Higher up the scale, extras were making £10 to £14 and £15 a day, and a little better at night. While there were also people who were giving specialist services. Men, for instance, like John Morris from Caltrabel. John was with us tonight, I was talking to him. He worked on the film in Knockma all summer with his tractor and trailer. And we know from Mary's book that John got £84 in his first week's wages. And my good friend Joe Flanagan, who's also with us here tonight, he's from over the road there in Caherlistrane, Joe, incidentally, owns a 10-acre field now up there beside where the first battle was fought. Joe worked for 3 months on the film, for much of it in the digging and maintenance of the White Horse, the famous White Horse, that was cut out of the ground 250 feet in length. It was an amazing sight. It would leave you gobsmacked when you saw it for the first time, but it was curiously underused, or hardly used at all in the finished film, except for scenes, not even particularly good scenes in the first of the battles. Now, Mary has other examples of specialist work being done for long stretches of that memorable summer by other local people, and you must get the book and read it and cherish it. It's all in there. It was fantastic money for us all in 1968. For many jobs, you know, an 18-year-old that time would have been very happy to start off at $5 a week. But in July 68 and into August, there were 18-year-olds up in Knockma having the time of their lives, earning 4, 5, maybe 6 times the wages of their friends working elsewhere for the summer. It was nearly impossible to describe what we did to earn our cash, and it was cash. You queued for it with enthusiasm. There was much more waiting and general hanging around than working, but we enjoyed being called into line and being taken on short marches, like army manoeuvres, really. And of course, taking part in the battles was what it was really all about. But even there, most of us were the blind leading the blind. We'd tighten up into a huddle and we'd look serious and mean. But the meaner we tried to look, the more comical it seemed. Some of us had swords. We'd carry our swords, but I think we were holding them like you'd hold a hurl at Pearse Stadium while the national anthem was being played. Now, the lads with the homemade spears would have been better off with hayforks. And worst of all, we always seemed to be on the edge of the fighting. We were like lads at the dances 40 years ago with false courage from too much drink and throwing out the old hold me back or I'll kill him line. You know? Now, the UCG students, maybe because they really had long hair, they definitely were much better than we were at the shouting and roaring and flaking all around them with the clubs and long sticks. I think we were the youth version of Dad's Army. Now, the film, incidentally, is freely available to view in its entirety, all 2 hours, 2 minutes of it. In fact, it's been showing inside in the house earlier on. And it's well worth a look, especially if you accept that all movies, but I think epics in particular, are escapism, a suspension of belief. They're not outside broadcast programs with live action in them. For the battle scenes in Alfred the Great, yes, they were spectacular, and the music was thrilling. The leading actors gave it all they had, but you'd have to laugh during the battles too. A ferocious Dane dressed in chainmail, wearing a mighty helmet and carrying a sword, looking for blood, would drop dead on the spot when a peasant Saxon would hit him a clout on the head with a club. Another Dane could ram his sword straight into a Saxon's heart, but the bold Saxon would jump back to life, off up the valley with him in case he missed anything. It just didn't quite add up, but who cares? We know from history that in the final reckoning, the Battle of Ettington, or Eddington, I think it's known as now, was won by Alfred with crucial assistance late in the fighting from a spirited bunch of old villagers, men and women. In other words, owl fellas and owl ones. And elderly monks, all seen in the film in a crucial battle, running to the rescue and showing the young warriors how to put the Viking invaders to flight. Now that was a credibility gap, so wide it was cringe-making. In the real battle, in the year 878, a man with a sword and knowing how to use it would not have lost his personal duel with a man carrying only a big stick. When I eventually saw the film, curiously in the Town Hall Theatre Galway in early April 1970, I think it came out around the middle of 69 perhaps, that last scene, nobody bought it as being convincing. And there was a drunk man sitting a few rows in front of me, and at the worst point of the cringe-making, he shouted out for the entire cinema to hear him. "Will you go way out of that?" he said. 50 years later, I've no doubt that man would probably go around saying he'd seen better fights outside Supermax in Ayr Square at 2 o'clock in the morning. There were some other aspects of the production that were quite simply incongruous. A high-profile British actress, Vivian Merchant, sadly, like David Hemmings, Fernella Ransom, Clive Donner and others, gone to their eternal reward. Vivian Merchant did not speak even one line in the whole film. And she didn't have to show any emotion. She stood there, or sat there, and did nothing, and said nothing. She was a brilliant actress. But it transpired that her then husband, the celebrated playwright Harold Pinter, a man who incidentally had acted in the Odeon Cinema in Tuam in 1952 with Anya McMaster's touring company. In 1 week he played Bassanio in The Merchant of Venice, and I think Lord Darlington in Windermere's Fan, the Wild Play. Pinter thought her script was so poor. He'd read it in London. He travelled over to Galway and he advised his wife to scrap all her lines and say nothing at all. And that's what happened. Also, curiously, in her first film, the actress Sinead Cusack, who was the most stunningly beautiful young woman, had, and I hope I'm right about this, but I think I am, one line to say in the whole film. I think it was something to do about the Bible. That's not the Bible that we read when we were young, something like that. Colin Blakely, a magnificent actor, who starred in the Abbey Theatre in March 1971 in the premiere of his great friend Tom Murphy's play, The Morning After Optimism, had to deliver probably the worst lines in the whole play. For example, in an early scene after the first battle, up against Whitehorse Hill, Knockma, Alfred is washing his wounds in the pond, and he says to the Colin Blakely character, Asser, a cleric, "Men do strange things in passion." Asser pauses. He replies, "Yes, they do." A longer pause would have done justice to Pinter. "Very strange, my lord." That's not Oscar-winning scriptwriting. And yes, I loved the film. I still do. In fairness, it had atmosphere. There was a filmmaking magic to much of it. The actors, the stars, they were all charismatic, and it was beautifully shot. I think you could have enjoyed it probably just as much if it had no script at all, just action and that marvellous, wonderfully evocative, towering music. It was beautiful to look at all the way through. Clearly, in all its technical aspects, there was a crew of brilliant people working on it, and many innovative things in it would stay in the mind. I was lost in admiration for the skill shown by the technical people, the sound recordists, the lighting people, but above all, the people who were looking after the cinematography, all the people who were doing camera work on it, all men, of course, at that time as it was. Their skill was dazzling, and I think I've had an appreciation of it ever since for that reason. And I cannot think about Alfred the Great, the film, without feeling some frisson of excitement or buzz when I think of the invaders marching down the valley, and some of us were talking about this inside. I was amazed. A good few people I met inside mentioned it earlier on. They were marching down the valley out there. We call it the valley, that's really what it looks like, towards the side of Whitehorse Hill, and the chanting getting louder as they marched. And this was every night for us out there. And even when we were kind of half trying to hide from the work as well, we always wanted just to hear that chanting. Some of you will remember it, that Antan, Antanan, and then it rose and it rose. Antan, Antanan, Antan, Antanan, went on and on like that. But it was magical to listen to it. And that was filmmaking, I think, at its brilliant best. I spoke in the past 2 weeks with two schoolmates of mine who were extras, as I said, Eddie Kelly and Porrick Dibley. And we had a great laugh about a particular incident that happened. We were thinking of a lad who sadly is no longer with us either. It's a great character, P.J. Gordon. I think he came from out around Ballinstack, out around Guild Pub in Ballinstack there. Sadly no longer with us, as I say. He was up a big tree one night. He was up in the tree, perched very high in very strong branches. And he just made himself comfortable, but a bit too comfortable. Now, his skill in climbing the tree would have done justice to Tarzan. But anyway, we call it Flash Gordon, was his nickname, of course. Flash fell asleep up on the tree. But then somebody woke him roughly because recording was starting and silence was ordered. But Flash forgot where he was. Filmmaking wasn't his biggest passion, or school, it was country music. He suddenly started to swing from one branch of the tree to another, singing loudly a Jim Reeves song that he loved. It was called don't let me cross over. You know the one, love's cheating line, you belong to another, you'll never be mine, etc. I won't sing it. And it was picked up by the sound engineers. Everything stopped. Wessex and Mercia and their kings and their soldiers fine, but not Jim Reeves. But what an outtake that was. A couple of funny things happened with horses. A horse, well trained, well army trained. I couldn't believe even that horses could do this or be trained to do it. A horse slid to the ground at the urging of his rider, an army man. But instead of jumping back up, the horse continued to lay on the ground and promptly decided to do what Flash Gordon had done. Not to sting, but he'd stretched out for a sleep. Wouldn't get up, and then everything had to be stopped and reorganised. Another night, a horse stopped while charging into battle, just stopped on the valley and proceeded to break wind. Loudly and persistently, very loudly, very persistently. Matt, are we in trouble now? Yeah. Are we okay? In a crisis, always send for Matt. Yeah. I'm having probably too much to say, Matt. It's probably affecting the microphone, but we're coming near the end. Right.
I hope we asked Matt to sing Galway Bay. The Kane version of it later on before we go away. I heard it recently at the graveside of my great friend Tommy Barden, and there were a lot of tears in a lot of people's eyes. Back to Alfred the Great. Anyway, the breaking of wind persisted, and again the filming had to be brought to a halt. Remarkably, and it wouldn't happen today, but it was very easy, surprisingly easy, to walk around the place while rehearsals were going on, and even while the director, Clive Donner, and his assistant, Redmond, and various other technical people were filming. One evening, with darkness falling, they were rehearsing a short but very important scene beside the cross mounted on that tall kind of a monument. A lot of you will remember it. There's pictures of it inside there, and it's a beautiful scene in the film, I think. It was located across the valley from the White Horse. It was just over on the right as we would look out here. And it was David Hemming's Alfred saying a prayer before going into battle. His exact line, which I took down from a viewing recently of it, was, "If I have to fight this enemy, let me do the necessary deed with courage and not with lust." He rehearsed it several times, and then it was recorded. And I was standing no more than 10 feet behind the director. I stayed there, quietly, listening and watching. Nobody asked me to move. It was really lovely to listen to. It was all beautifully done, and to this day I think, yes, that's the proof. Filmmaking is something magical happening. Now, Belclare and Comer and Corrafin, Caherlistrane and the town of Tuam embraced the making of Alfred the Great. David Hemmings refereed a soccer match at the Ballygluanan Park fundraiser, the open day fundraiser. That was the home of the former Blake residence. He wanted to play, reportedly, but he wasn't given permission, obviously because of fear of injury. That's a photograph of it that appeared in the Herald. That's David Hemmings with the whistle in his mouth refereeing the match. One evening, myself and another schoolmate waited down at the turn from Clare Tuam, when you go onto the Tuam Road there, and we saw David Hemmings' flashy car speeding towards us with the roof down. We were about to start thumbing a lift to Galway, and we were foolish enough to hope that he might stop for us. He would have been heading back to Oram Castle at the time. He'd rented it for the summer. But his driver kept going. But that wasn't all. David gave us a big smile, a huge wave, and that was enough to keep us happy. That would not happen now on a location anywhere in the world. As you've heard, the town of Tuam organised a best beard competition, and it had a massive entry. It was judged by that very fine actor Jim Norton, who had a good part in Alfred the Great, and it was won by a farmer from Comer, Peter King. His picture appeared on the front page of the Tuam Herald. Incidentally, almost all of the Herald's excellent coverage of the filming in Knockma would have included the chief reporter at the time, the great Jim Fahey. And there were many lovely pics by Michael Shotnessy from Tubber Jarlath Road. He was a brilliant press photographer. So too his successor down the years, Ray Ryan, which is wonderful to see Ray here this evening. And I think, yeah, he's an unsung hero, he's taken for granted. I think the late, much missed Joe Dillon also took great pics of the filming. not only in Knockma, but in Kilcrease too. He too was an artist. But after the main, around the time of the main beard competition, which I should give it its correct title, I read some old cuttings of Herald cuttings that I have with me here tonight. It was called the Night of the Beard competition. But Tuam Youth Club also organised a best beard competition. It had only 3 or 4 entries, and I had a blackish, rough face, and growing a beard was no problem. I was the delighted winner of what was almost a 1-horse race. The prize was a shiny new 10-bob note, great money back then. It was a crazy time. I couldn't get a lift home to Milltown very late one night in Tuam, and from knowing every yard of Parkmore Racecourse, where we played our school football, I headed up to the stables and went to the one with the most hay and got a great night's sleep. But there's nothing wrong with sleeping out. W.H. Auden wrote one of his greatest poems about sleeping on the lawn. Early next morning, Eddie Kelly collected me, and we were off out to Knockma to become Saxons again. Mighty crack, and we were getting paid for it. Now, I'd just like to mention a few other small things, ladies and gentlemen, and I thank you for your time. I came across a wonderful cutting from the Herald from that time as well. It's titled Night on a Film Set. I brought it with me. There's some fantastic names mentioned in it, apart from David and Prunella. There was a Miss Ita Murphy from Hedford who got to meet David Hemmings there that night. Further down, there are people like Tommy Dooley, Paddy Joe Monaghan, Fintan Donoghue, Mick Fahey. They're all neighbours of yours. They're mentioned as well, and so on and on. And there's a brilliant description of what the atmosphere was like on the film set that night. The man who wrote it even got to dine with the director at one stage. He could walk around like me, meet people, chat to the stars, and he put it all down in print. Very long piece, but it's a wonderful, wonderful read. And I'd like to take this opportunity this evening of complimenting the person who wrote it, because he's here tonight with his wife, and that's wonderful. That was written by the great Martin Tyrrell. So Martin, my compliment to you. Lovely to see you, Martin. Martin has been a long-serving stalwart of the business community of Tuam and North Galway and Connacht and Ireland and the diaspora as well. And I think we should cherish the people who did so much over the last 50 years and 60, a little more than 50, I think, Martin. You were here a little bit before that. But wonderful to see Martin and Anne here tonight. Now, I'd like to mention as well my 2 swords. There they are, aren't they wonderful? Kept immaculately for the last 50 years. These were preserved by Tom and Teresa and Francis Hines from Ceylon. Tom was in the movie with his beard, and he befriended one of the senior production people on it, who offered Tom afterwards, as a souvenir, the swords. They're not quite heavy steel or anything like that, but they do look fantastic. The handles especially are slightly different. There was obviously some status with the sword carriers, but I think they're wonderful. Now, the blood is on them, of course. Let's pretend it's not fake or anything like that. Tom says that that's the way it was 50 years ago. But I'm not so sure. When I think of the fierce rivalry between Corrafin and Caherlistrane on the football fields, I'm not so sure is that blood. It does look a little bit fresh. Anyway, my thanks to the Hines family who are here tonight as well. I would like to mention, and you'll see it all in Mary's book, you'll see it all in the Herald cuttings down through the years, the Allo-D furniture was the greatest work of art, I think, ever produced in furniture from Tuam or from North Galway. It was just amazing, just that beautiful, ornate, classical furniture. And I think we should think of, the genius of people like Tom Dowd. A friend of mine that time, Peter Bugg. Peter actually joined me on Facebook yesterday with some memories he had of the film, and in fact, he still has the cutting from the Tuam Herald, and he put it up on Facebook yesterday, even though he is now sailing, as he is for most of the time, on the east coast of America. 1968 was a year of great unrest in the world, with the student protests in Europe and France and around, the civil rights marches, the assassinations of Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. But life back here, in that era, was amazing for people like us. And the making of the film, I have to say this, in many ways I think, and this was the final point I'll make, I think that the making of the film was all that counted. I think it didn't matter whether it was a great film or not. As I say, I love the film, and I mean that. It doesn't matter. The making of the film was so big, it wasn't hype, it was excitement. It was just magical, magical time. And we had in our company then, people, stars like David Hemmings, and Prunella Ransom, and Ian McKellen, and Sinead Cusack, and all those people. But around that time too, in Tuam, Mick Jagger and Marianne Faithfull walked down Bishop Street. Nobody said a word to them. Nobody batted an eyelid. People would have just said, how ya, to them. Gone down to have a drink in Tommy Joyce's. Donovan, who was a world star at the time, hanging out with John Lennon and Bob Dylan. He was out in Ballyglunin Park for a while. He came into Tuam once or twice. Nobody said a word to him either. Jagger and Marianne, incidentally, were out in Molly's, out in Lady Molly's, out in Birmingham House. And again, we probably take Birmingham House for granted, and even Lady Molly for granted, who I think is much missed. I met her once or twice, and yes, I found her as formidable as everybody else did. But she was a lioness of a woman, and I think she should be very, very fondly remembered. And of course, we're here now beside Canavan's pub. And that's the pub that the great Lady Molly story emanated from. It. When Molly met the priest. Joe, you know that story? It was a foggy morning. They were out hunting for a long time. It was very heavy. It was ideal for hunting, maybe. But when the priest anyway met Molly outside Canavan's, I could be wrong, but I think he was a Father Murphy, I'm not sure. He said to Molly, he said, Lady Molly, he said, would you look at the steam rising from that horse? Lady Molly fixed him with a look and a smile of wry amusement, and she said, let me tell you, Padre, that if you were between my legs for the past 2 hours hunting around these fields and jumping these bloody stone walls, there would have been a lot of steam rising from your flanks too, Padre. Lady Molly was a colourful and wonderful personality. So you tie Lady Molly with Jagger, Marianne, Donovan, Hemmings and all these people. Who wouldn't remember the 60s with the fondness that I remember? So, thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Jim Carney. That was absolutely brilliant. Our next speaker, Knockma and Castlehacket, are where it all began half a century ago for Redmond Morris, now a prominent Oscar-nominated producer for The Reader starring Kate Winslet. Over the years, Redmond has applied his finely attuned people skills to producing movies like Notes on a Scandal with Kate Blanchett and Judi Dench, The Big Man with Liam Neeson and Neil Jordan, The Crying Game. There have been many, many others, including London Boulevard, written by Galway's Ken Broom, who was also an extra in Alfred 50 years ago. Mary J. Murphy first contacted Redmond almost 2 years ago, and he was always game to be here if his schedule allowed it. And how grateful we are that it has. His work was honoured at the Galway Film Fleadh 2009, at which Alfred the Great was screened. So on a night such as this, in a house such as this, on a unique parish occasion such as this, it is fitting perhaps to have amongst us a Lord who is also a quintessential Galway boy, a neophyte, and Alfred 50 years ago, along with fellow deputants and current stars Ian McKellen, Sinead Cusack. This is where it all began for Redmond Morris, where he earned his ACT union card. So from Knockma to Hollywood and back again to Knockma 50 years later. Ladies and gentlemen, keep your warmest Castlehacket welcome to Redmond Morris, Baron Killannon.
My goodness. How can I follow you, Jim? You had half the stories that I was going to tell.
Sorry, Rick. You were the real star.
But, oh my goodness. Yeah. Luckily, I have a memory of the 60s as well. So.
Good.
No, I was just, I'm not going to speak for as long as Jim, but I remember when Mary asked me if I, would be involved in this, and I thought, well, if I do, it sort of admits how old I am. And then I thought, well, actually, no, that's okay, because Alfred the Great was very important in my life. It was the first film that I did. And also, I thought that the majority of the people who would be here today would be of a similar age, the extras anyway. And I can see it is the case, and we have the 50 Shades of Grey here. But it was a very important part of my life, because I wanted to go into film, and I had been on the set of The Quiet Man as a very, very small boy. And that's where I decided that is what I wanted to do. And I went to university in Dublin, but I didn't do awfully well there. And I had a father who was very sort of forward-looking, and he said to me one day, after I'd failed my exams, he came into my room and said, "There's somebody on the phone who wants to employ you on a film." And I thought, well, it's nice of him to do that, because I was trying to work out whether I was going to do my exams again or not. So anyway, I began a career which has ended here today, except my career hasn't ended, hopefully. It will soon, but not quite yet. Anyway, I went to London to work for Clive, who directed the film. I worked as his assistant in London, which is a marvellous opportunity. I mean, that was all because of my father's involvement in the film. And I thought, how wonderful to be able to go to Galway and make a film, to work on a film and to do the kind of things that I hoped I'd be doing for the rest of my life. So I began in London, and we used to come over here, and we went to Castlehacket, we went to Kilcrease, and we went all over looking for locations, and I was behind him with my notebook and everything. And then I thought that's what I was going to do for the whole of the film. But in fact, what happened was Clive said, what you need to do is to work on the film. You need to work on the floor. So I became a third assistant, but I wasn't able to be called a third assistant, because in the days of the unions, you had to have, as Jim said, an ACT ticket. So I had to apply, and I was the runner for a while. And then eventually I was able to be called the third assistant. So I worked with the assistant directors, the ones who were extras here. I'm sure we'll remember, it was Peter Price and Brian Cook and Michael Stevenson, who were the peoples that I worked with. And I went to live with them in White Strand Road in Salt Hill. And I hope the lady who owns White Strand Road isn't here today, because I think we left a phone bill there that was quite large. And I was totally in awe of these guys. They all had sort of Gucci shoes and London shirts and all of this. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. This is fantastic. Anyway, as it happens, after that I went to London, and I was out of work for a long time, and I wasn't able to buy all the things that I wanted to. But the original job that I had on the film was every morning I had to go to Oram to wake David up in order that he would be on the set in time. He was always asleep, so I'd come a bit early, and I'd knock on his door. He wasn't always alone, I have to say. And I'd make his eggs and bacon, and he'd kind of get up, and then he'd drive. He had a big Rolls Royce, you remember, a huge Rolls Royce, which incidentally he was away one weekend, and his assistant and about 3 or 4 of us went to Salt Hill in the Rolls Royce, thinking, oh, it would be so easy to pick up some girls in this. Nada. No good whatsoever. I suppose, Jim has certainly given you the atmosphere of the movie for those who were on it, and for those who weren't there, kind of thing. And he's a fantastic explanation of how it worked and the fun that we all had. And that's why I've never looked on Alfred the Great as a bad film. I looked at it on as a fun film, because I don't think ever on a movie since, and I've worked on some terrible films, that I've had so much fun. There was just so much in Galway. I suppose the fact that I was at home, so to speak, the fact that I was living in Galway, in town, because Spiddle that came from was a little bit, when I lived there as a kid, one wasn't able to go out that much, etc. So, and Galway, the pubs and the Great Southern Hotel, and the Lobster on the restaurant on the roof of the Great Southern Hotel and everything. I mean, it was a world that I didn't kind of know about, but I was totally mesmerized with it. And as I say, I mean, I can't remember how much I was earning. It certainly wasn't very much, but I thought, this is great. I mean, it was enough to allow me to eat the lobster because I was on a location. I had a per diem, I remember, which is the most wonderful thing about working on films when you aren't at home is the per diem. The per diem is everything. Anyway, I mean, an awful lot of things happened during the movies. Most of them hilarious, I thought, anyway. I mean, for instance, Jim mentioned Molly Cusack Smith. I remember we went to the Hunt Ball at what's the house? Birmingham House. At Birmingham House. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we had to get home to Whitestrand Road, so we called a cab. The cab arrived. About 2 hours later, we ended having to drive the cabman in his own cab, having had much too much to drink, all the way to Whitestrand. So we left him outside in his cab. What else? Oh yes, I mean, just the whole thing at Oranmore, the atmosphere at Oranmore was so great, and David was such a fantastic host, and every weekend something happened. The Donkey Derby was such an event, and all the horsemen on the movie, they had a bookies and everything, and the horsemen, the guys who organised the horse on the movie, had fixed the donkeys. They knew what the good donkeys were, and of course they gave it to David because he was the star. I remember at the castle, he had an accident. He fell off the sort of high window, there's a ledge. David Bailey, the photographer, who in fact was the character in a way that the blow-up that he played in Blow Up, he was there that night. And I remember, having to go in the next morning, and he wasn't able to get out of bed, and we had an insurance claim, and we couldn't shoot. Every night was a party. It was incredible, but not in any grand. I mean, everybody took the work absolutely seriously. I mean, Kilcrease was an extraordinary place. The way, I think you can see from the pictures inside, it was a very well designed interior and exterior that one could move the camera into rooms and out of rooms and then into the countryside. It was kind of it was like a tapestry in a way. And I think the opening of the film, I think you say in your book, Mary, that it was the bio tapestry was the sort of the motif for the whole thing. I remember once there was a scene where the horse, a young guy, a local guy had to come up with the horse and rear up in the village and say, "To the battle of the marshes or the king will die." And everybody thought he says, "I've got 2 tickets for the king and I." What else? I mean, it's just, as I say, unfortunately, you've taken a few of my things. Anyway, oh yeah, there was the story. I mean, every weekend one would want to know on a Monday who'd been to Morrison's on the quay and who'd had an accident, because every week somebody as you come out of Morrison's, there's a sort of an S-bend, and almost every week somebody ended up in the field. I remember when we went to Athlone, and we were all in the Prince of Wales Hotel, and I went out in the morning. One of my jobs was to open the caravans for David and what have you. And I opened the caravans, and there were the camera crew asleep beside the lake. And I said, That's happened. Apparently what had happened, one or two were smoking in the hotel, and the manager threw them out, so they'd all got into a car and broke into the caravans and slept there. So there was a little bit of that going on, I have to say. Yes, and the waiter at the Prince of Wales, who was egg mayonnaise, who ordered egg mayonnaise, and it came in a Mary Rose sauce, and this isn't egg mayonnaise. This isn't egg mayonnaise. It's sort of egg whatever. He said, if the chef wants to call it egg mayonnaise, he can call it egg mayonnaise. Funny old hotel. Anyway. And then there was a time that somebody wanted an early call. I don't know if it was Prunella in Loch Cutre. She lived in Loch Cutre. Everybody had a castle. Michael York had a castle. Prunella had a castle. David was at Oram. And they rang up, I think the first morning that they were on call in order to get an alarm call. And I know things people knew about them as such in that time, but anyway, they rang and said, I'd like you to wake me up at 5:30. And they said, well, I'll do that if you can ring me at 5:15 to wake me up. So it was a great time of stories, hard work. It was really hard work. We worked long hours. It was in the dirt, in the rain, in the sunshine. And the sunshine, as Jim says, unfortunately, in film, somehow one never gets the weather that you've come for. I've worked on a few things in the snow, and the snow just hasn't been there. I think it was Gorky Park, a film called Gorky Park in Helsinki, and there was so little snow, we had to make snow, and everybody's saying, oh, if you come last year, there was snow here. But anyway, just to conclude, I suppose, that's what I am where I am now, which is just sort of, I'm still surviving, having begun here in a way, in Knockma and Kilcreast and Galway. So that was why it was kind of important in a way, Mary, that I kind of was able to come and remember. And all sorts of, I mean, the memories, the kind of things that I've been talking about have all sort of come out of thinking or having to think about the things that happened here. But anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
Before we go on to the next speaker, I want to call the Mayor of Caherlistrane, Brendan Gannon, who's going to make a presentation on behalf of the council to Redmond. Brendan.
Oh, wow. That'll bring back memories. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just before we go to our last speaker, I just want to, on behalf of my own behalf and on the council's behalf, I just want to thank a few people who made this evening possible. Obviously, I've talked to Dennis and Joyce already, but we also want to thank people like Matt, Tom and Ronnie, who put all of the sound and the video stuff moving inside. I want to thank them very sincerely for all their work over the last couple of days. I also want to thank Timmy Monaghan and a bunch of guys he has with him outside, David Hines, I don't have all the names, so they know who they are. I want to thank them sincerely, because bringing something like this together, if you have it organised properly, it's easy. If you don't, it can be a mess. So I want to thank Timmy and all his crew very, very sincerely. The other group of people are people that are inside that you don't see, and that probably you will see now. People who organise the tea and the refreshments for us, ably led by Margaret Kine. So I want to, again, on my behalf and on your behalf, thank them very sincerely for doing that. Okay, so our last speaker, Mary J. Murphy, a journalist, broadcaster who has worked in Iceland, Nashville, London and New York, and for RT and the Irish Times over the years. Mary J. is originally from Minla, and author of 3 books, including Viking Summer, available here this evening, with 2 more on the way. One on painters and art on Achill Island is set for launch in spring 2019. Her 5th book will be a biography of Anglo-Irish poet Emily Lawless, whose mother was Elizabeth Kerwin from Castlehacket House here. Emily knew Prime Minister Gladstone, W.B. Yeats and Douglas Hyde, and she spent her formative years here in this very house, roaming these very fields. Mary has dreamed about this Alfred the Great golden anniversary for a very long time, and is delighted for all involved that this evening has finally come. So I give you Mary J. Murphy.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you. This is going to be very short and sweet, because all I really wanted to say was to thank people. I have no speech prepared. I have nothing to say except how amazing was this evening. This Alfred the Great story started for me when I met my husband Gerard 30 years ago, and one of the first dates he brought me on was to climb on that hill, and he explained that a film had been made on the hill, and I said, you must be wrong, because I never heard of it. There was no film ever made here. How wrong I was. And then we brought out the book 10 years ago, and I see an awful lot of people who helped us with the book and the research and the questions here this evening, and that's really fantastic. And this setting is just mind-blowing. It's amazing when you have a dream of something happening like we had in our house for the last 2 to 3 years. We've been watching for this 50th anniversary. We obviously have a very quiet life at home, but it's just wonderful that it has come to fruition. And obviously we thank Redmond Morris, who's here in his own right, and as the son of, and as somebody who went away for 50 years via Hollywood and came back here and made the time for us and for the daft emails I've been sending him for so long. And I'm just, on my own behalf, I'm deeply appreciative, and I'm also appreciative on behalf of our community, because you might see now this is a very dynamic community. It has a long memory. It has a very long memory, and it remembers Alfred the Great and a lot further back. So thank you, Redmond Morris, very much for coming with me. I'm just going to hop through people now chronologically. As I said, I have no big speech to make whatsoever. I've thanked Gerard, I've thanked Redmond. Billy, thank you for bringing it all together for us. Jim Carney, if I could afford you, I'd get you more often to make speeches for us. Marie Gillen, thank you for standing in so ably for our good friend Hugh Oram. He's not well, but we hope he will recover soon. Billy, have we thanked the piper? I don't think we thanked Porrick Kane, the wonderful piper here this evening. Yes, thank you. Matt Kane got him, and Anna McHugh organised the piper. He's an amazing musician. It was beautiful to hear the pipe music floating in the air this evening. I would also like to thank Anna McHugh and Dennis. They designed and devised the beautiful booklets we have here this evening. They're wonderful souvenirs to have for all of us. So thank you. Where's Anna McHugh? Shy, retiring Anna. Where is she? So thank you very much, Anna and Dennis, for that. Dennis and Joyce, of course, our hosts here this evening. The Caherlistrane Community Council and the Heritage Society under the leadership of Tom Craddock. We've thanked Billy. Have we thanked lighting and sound and catering and all of that kind of thing? The media, oh for heaven's sake, look at the media, look over here. Yes, and Kevin McNicholas for videoing, and Rory McNicholas this evening, thank you. And the media, we have David Burke over here to our left, who's been a consistent supporter of this entire area, and Knockma, and filming, and heritage, and everything to do with it. So please, could we have a round of applause for David Burke? And I'll put the front page next week again. And we had RT as well, Pat McGrath here earlier this evening. I gather there was something on the 6-1 news this evening. We didn't see it, but it's on the sound player, whatever that's called. Now, I think that brings my piece to an end here this evening. If I'm forgetting anybody or anything, please shout out. The time is now before the ship sails. Am I forgetting anybody? If not, what we're going to do, just for fun, is we're going to have 3 cheers for Alfred the Great. Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip! Hooray! Hooray! Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you.
How are you?
Had I youth's blood and hopeful mood and a heart of fire. For all the gold the world might hold, I'd never leave your shore, and I'd be content with whatever God sent, with neighbours old and grey, and I'd lay my bones in churchyard stones beside you always, and the blessings of a poor old man be with you tonight. And the blessings of a lonely man whose heart will soon be clear. And it's all of heaven I'll ask of God upon my dying day. I soar forevermore above you always. My soul to soar forevermore above you.